Nicholas thought he could fire me to give his unqualified fiancée a corporate playground, risking thousands of lives just to save a few dollars on maintenance. He called my safety standards obsolete and too expensive. He didn't know I was silently tracking every cut corner. I didn't sue him. I waited for Thanksgiving Eve and grounded his entire fleet, burning his legacy to the ground. Before this story continues, tell me, where are you watching from today and what's the temperature? I hope it's warmer than the chill that went down my spine when I saw what they were doing to those engines. The conference room on the 42nd floor was cold. It wasn't just the aggressively set air conditioning, which hummed in the background like a dying turbine. It was the atmosphere. The walls were glass, offering a panoramic view of the airfield below, my airfield. From here, the Boeing 777s looked like toys, but I knew the terrifying power contained within every single one of them. I knew the torque specs on every bolt and the viscosity of the hydraulic fluid running through their veins. I had spent 7 years keeping those birds in the sky. I was the youngest director of maintenance in the airline's history, a position I had clawed my way up to with grease under my fingernails and a caffeine addiction that would kill a lesser mammal. Nicholas Peterson, our CEO, didn't look at the planes. He was looking at his tablet, scrolling through a spreadsheet with a look of mild disgust. Nicholas was 38, a tech disruptor who had inherited the airline from his father and immediately decided that aviation was just like software development. He thought you could move fast and break things. In my line of work, if you break things, people die. Jane, Nicholas said, finally looking up. He didn't smile. He wore a navy suit that cost more than my first car, and his hair was gelled into a rigid, unmoving wave. We need to talk about the Q4 projections. I sat up straighter, adjusting the cuffs of my blazer. The projections are fine, Nicholas. Maintenance costs are up 3%, but that's because the fleet is aging. We're doing the heavy C-checks this month. It's non-negotiable. Nicholas sighed, a long, theatrical exhale through his nose. He tapped the glass table with a manicured finger. See, that word, non-negotiable. That's the problem with your department, Jane. You operate in a binary world. Yes or no, go or no go, it's archaic. It's physics, I replied, my voice steady, though my pulse began to hammer in my throat. Gravity doesn't negotiate with quarterly earnings. We're pivoting, he said, dropping the buzzword like a gavel. The board and I agree that the maintenance division has become a bottleneck. We're bleeding cash on preventative measures that, statistically, are redundant. We need a fresh perspective, someone who understands the holistic vision of the brand. I felt the blood drain from my face. I am the director of maintenance. My vision is that the wings stay attached to the fuselage. What other vision is there? Nicholas smiled then, a tight, pitying expression. We're restructuring your role. Effective immediately, you are being transitioned out of the director position. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the wind buffeting the glass 40 stories up. You're firing me. We're evolving, he corrected. However, per your contract, you have a 4-week notice period. We need you to stay on to transition the department to the new vice president of maintenance. Vice president? I asked, confused. Who did you hire? Did you get Miller from United or Sarah from Delta? Nicholas cleared his throat, shifting his gaze back to his tablet. Actually, we decided to go internal. Well, close to internal, we needed someone I can trust implicitly, someone who shares my vision for efficiency. The door to the conference room opened. Sorry I'm late, a voice chirped. The elevator was taking forever. It was Mabel, Nicholas's fiancée. I stared at her. Mabel was a nice woman, in the way a golden retriever is nice. She was 26, a former interior designer who had redecorated Nicholas's penthouse. She was wearing a bright pink blazer and open-toed heels that were strictly prohibited on the tarmac. Mabel, I whispered. Hi, Jane, she beamed, sitting next to Nicholas and placing a bedazzled phone on the table. I'm so excited to work with you. Nick says you're super organized. I looked at Nicholas. You cannot be serious. She's an interior designer. She thinks a flaps-up landing is a yoga pose. Mabel has an eye for detail, Nicholas snapped, his voice turning ice cold. And she understands budget management. She's going to streamline the department. You will spend the next 30 days showing her the ropes. If you refuse, we can test your severance package and blackball you from the industry. He leaned forward, his eyes dead. Teach her how to. Run the logs, Jane. Don't argue, just do it. The transition began the next morning at 0700. Usually, I started my day with a walk around of the hangar, checking in with the lead mechanics, smelling the jet fuel and ozone, listening for the distinctive whine of the auxiliary power units. Today, I spent the morning showing Mabel how to log into her email. So, Mabel said, spinning around in what used to be my chair. My nameplate was already in the trash can. A new one, reading Mabel, VP of Maintenance, sat on the desk. It was written in a cursive font. Nick says we spend way too much money on these inspections. Like, why do we check the tires every day? Don't cars go months without checking tires? I took a deep breath, counting to 3. Mabel, a car weighs 2 tons and goes 60 miles an hour. A 737 weighs 80 tons and lands at 160 miles an hour. If a tire blows on landing, the friction can ignite the hydraulic lines, and the plane turns into a fireball. Mabel wrinkled her nose. You're so dramatic. Nick said you'd be dramatic. She stood up and walked to the window overlooking the hangar floor. God, it's so dingy down there. Gray floors, gray walls, it's depressing. First order of business, we need to paint the hangar, maybe a calming blue. We don't have budget for paint, I said, grinding my teeth. We barely have the budget for the new turbine blades on bird 402. See, she turned to me, pointing a finger with a long, perfectly manicured nail. That's the attitude we need to fix. You focus on the problems. I focus on the vibes. If the mechanics feel good, they'll work better. She didn't visit the floor that day. She didn't want to get her shoes dirty. Instead, she spent 6 hours in her office, my office, looking at fabric swatches for the new mechanic uniforms because she felt the current navy blue was too aggressive. Meanwhile, I went down to the floor. The mechanics, men and women I had worked with for years, looked at me with confusion. Jane, called out Sam, my lead engine tech. He was a burly guy in his 50s, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. I saw the email. VP of Maintenance? The fiancé? Is this a joke? I wish it were, Sam, I said quietly. I'm strictly in an advisory role for the next few weeks. Sam lowered his voice. We've got the B-check coming up on the transatlantic fleet. That's a heavy workload. I need approval for overtime, or we won't finish the structural inspections in time for the Thanksgiving rush. Submit the request, I said. I'll try to get her to sign it. I went back upstairs. Mabel was on the phone, laughing. When she saw me, she waved me in. Jane, perfect timing. I was just looking at these overtime requests from a guy named Sam. He wants to pay people double to work on Saturday. It's standard, Mabel. If we don't do the inspections, the planes can't fly. Well, she said, tapping her chin. Nick wants us to cut operational costs by 15% this month to boost the Q4 stock price. So, I'm denying it. You can't, I said, stepping forward. If you deny the overtime, the inspections don't happen. If the inspections don't happen, the FAA grounds the planes. Mabel rolled her eyes. You and your rules will just do the inspections on Monday. The planes can fly on Saturday without them. It's just one day. That is illegal, I said, my voice rising. It is a violation of federal law. Mabel's smile vanished. Jane, you're being negative again. I'm the VP. I say we skip the Saturday shift, approve the denial. She turned back to her computer, dismissing me. I stood there, staring at the back of her head, realizing that this wasn't just nepotism anymore. This was dangerous. 5 days later, the inevitable happened. It was a Tuesday afternoon. A rainy, miserable day where the tarmac was slick and the visibility was garbage. I was in the break room, nursing a lukewarm coffee, trying to ignore the fact that my access badge had been downgraded from all areas to visitor escort required. The door burst open. It was Sam. He looked pale. "Jane, you need to come see bird 209. Now." "I can't, Sam. I'm not authorized to make decisions." "Screw authorization," he hissed. "Just come." I followed him out to the hangar. Bird 209 was a massive wide-body jet, the workhorse of our international routes. It was up on jacks. Sam led me to the portside landing gear. He shone his flashlight onto the main strut. Even without the light, I could see it. A hairline fracture running vertically along the metal. It was small, maybe 2 inches, but in my world, a 2-inch crack is the Grand Canyon. "Stress fracture," Sam said grimly. "We found it during the routine tire change. This strut is dead. We need to ground the plane and replace the entire assembly. It's a $100,000 part and a 3-day job." "Good catch," I said, feeling the familiar adrenaline of crisis management. "Tag it out, G." "Around the plane." "I tried," Sam said, looking at his boots. "I took the report to Mabel." My stomach dropped, and she came down, she looked at it. She asked if we could just weld it shut. I closed my eyes. "Please tell me you explained why that's impossible." I did. She said we don't have the budget for a new assembly this month because she already spent the discretionary fund on the new office furniture. She told me to paint over it. I froze. She said what? She said to apply sealant and paint over it so the inspectors won't see it. She said it's small, and we can replace it next quarter. I didn't say a word. I turned on my heel and marched toward the elevators. I didn't wait for the doors to open fully before I stormed out onto the executive floor. I bypassed the receptionist and threw open the door to Mabel's office. Nicholas was there. They were looking at color palettes. "You," I said, pointing at Mabel. "You ordered a mechanic to paint over a stress fracture on a landing gear strut." Mabel jumped. "Jesus, Jane, not much." "Do you have any idea what you are doing?" I shouted. "If that strut collapses on landing, the gear shears off. The engine hits the runway. The fuel tank ruptures. 200 people burn to death. You are not painting over it." Nicholas stood up, his face reddening. "Jane, lower your voice." "No," I slammed my hand on the desk. "This isn't about efficiency, Nicholas. She is ordering illegal maintenance fraud. I am grounding bird 209 right now." "You are doing no such thing," Nicholas said, his voice dangerously low. "Mabel is the VP. It is her call. She consulted with other experts and they determined the risk is minimal." "What experts?" I demanded. "Her hairdresser." "That is enough," Nicholas snapped. "Jane, you are creating a toxic work environment. You are undermining leadership. Consider this your first and final written warning for insubordination." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was already printed. They had been waiting for this. "Sign it," Nicholas said, "or we terminate you for cause today and you lose your pension." I looked at the paper. Then I looked at Mabel, who was smirking, looking victorious. She thought she had won. She thought this was a game of office politics. I looked at Nicholas, the man who cared more about his quarterly bonus than human lives. I realized then that shouting wouldn't save anyone. If I fought them openly, they would just fire me and hide the evidence. I needed to stay. I needed to be here to see exactly what they were breaking. I picked up the pens. "Fine," I said, my voice dead calm. "I'll sign, and I won't question Mabel's judgment again." I signed the paper. But as I walked out of that office, my hands weren't shaking anymore. My mind was already calculating. They wanted to hide the truth? Fine. I would make sure every single lie was recorded, time-stamped, and backed up. I wasn't the director of maintenance anymore. I was a witness. The following week was an exercise in masochism. I became a ghost in my own department. I stopped speaking in meetings unless directly asked. I sat in the back, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, while Mabel presented slide decks filled with buzzwords like synergy and aesthetic optimization. But while I was silent in the boardroom, I was busy in the server room. I knew the airline's IT architecture better than the actual IT director. Years ago, I had insisted on a redundant backup system for our maintenance logs, a shadow server designed to catch data in case of a main system crash. It was an old, dusty box in the basement that everyone had forgotten about, everyone except me. I wrote a simple script. Every time Mabel or Nicholas authorized a change in the digital maintenance records, every time they marked a repair as complete when no parts had been ordered, every time they deleted a safety flag, my script copied the original, unaltered data to the shadow server. The data began to pile up. November 2nd, bird 402 flagged for turbine vibration. Mabel's action, flag deleted. Reason, sensor error. November 4th, bird 118 overdue for hydraulic flush. Mabel's action, date altered to show work completed 3 months ago. November 7th, bird 209, the plane with the cracked strut was put back into rotation. Mabel's action, visual inspection passed. No defect found. I watched bird 209 taxi out to the runway that morning from my office window. My heart was in my throat. I had my phone in my hand, ready to call the tower, ready to blow my cover and scream that the plane was unsafe. But it took off, it flew, it landed safely in London. That was the terrifying thing about aviation. Safety margins are huge. You can cut corners for a while and get away with it. It's like playing Russian roulette. Just because the gun didn't go off the first 3 times doesn't mean the chamber is empty. Mabel and Nicholas were pulling the trigger. Over and over again, emboldened by their luck. I spent my nights in the basement, downloading the shadow logs onto encrypted hard drives. I was building a digital coffin for their careers, but I knew that raw data wasn't enough. I needed someone who knew how to weaponize it. The diner was called The Hangar, a greasy spoon 5 miles from the airport where the coffee tasted like burnt rubber and the pancakes were the size of hubcaps. It was neutral ground. I sat in a booth in the back, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, feeling ridiculous. I checked my watch. 10:00 p.m. The door chimed. Mason Reed walked in. I hadn't seen Mason in 5 years. We had been rivals at Embry-Riddle, constantly competing for the top spot in the aviation safety program. He was brilliant, arrogant, and annoying. After graduation, I went into fleet management. He went into the federal sector. He was now a senior auditor for the FAA's Office of Audit and Evaluation. He slid into the booth opposite me, loosening his tie. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. "Jane Ray's," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Wearing a disguise in a diner. Are you robbing the place or hiding from the paparazzi?" "Worse," I said. "I'm hiding from my boss." Mason's smile faded. "I heard rumors. Nicholas Peterson took over. He's slashing budgets. Is it bad?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a single hard drive. I slid it across the table. "It's not just bad, Mason. It's criminal." He looked at the drive, then up at me. "What is this?" "Proof," I whispered. "Falsified logs, deferred critical maintenance, pencil whipping inspections. They're flying planes with cracked struts and overdue engines. They're gambling with 30,000 lives a day." Mason picked up the drive, turning it over in his hands. "If this is true, Jane, this is a nuclear bomb, but you know the protocol. If I open an investigation, it takes months. We have to subpoena records, interview mechanics. By the time we act, they'll have covered their tracks or fixed the issues." "I don't want an investigation," I said, leaning forward. "I want a grounding order." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Immediate grounding? That requires imminent threat to life. It requires irrefutable proof that the fleet is currently unairworthy." "Open the drive," I said. "Look at the folder marked bird 209. Look at the timestamps. Then look at the folder marked Thanksgiving schedule." He pulled a laptop out of his bag and plugged in the drive. I watched his face as he scrolled. His eyes widened. He stopped chewing his gum. Jesus, he muttered. They painted over a strut fracture and signed it off. Yes, and that plane is scheduled for 4 transcontinental flights next week. Mason closed the laptop. He looked at me with a newfound respect and fear. Okay, you have the smoking gun, but if we drop this now, they might just ground that one plane. They'll scapegoat a mechanic, claim it was a rogue employee, and keep flying the rest. Exactly, I said. That's why we wait. Wait. Thanksgiving Eve, I said. The single busiest travel day of the year. Every plane they have will be in the air or at a gate. The system will be maxed out. If you drop the order then, the chaos will be absolute. They won't be able to spin it. The financial hit will be so massive the board will have no choice but to liquidate the management. Mason whistled low. That's cold, Jane. That's ice cold. They tried to ruin my reputation, I said. They threatened my pension, and they're risking lives. I don't want a slap on the wrist, Mason. I want to burn the house down. Mason pocketed the drive. He extended a hand. Happy Thanksgiving, Jane. Returning to work after meeting Mason was the hardest acting job of my life. I had to play the defeated employee. I attended the morning briefings. I nodded when Mabel suggested we switch to a cheaper brand of de-icing fluid. I didn't object when Nicholas announced that our on-time departure metrics were up 10% thanks to the streamlined maintenance protocols. See, Nicholas said in a meeting, gesturing to me, even Jane is on board now. She's seen the light. Adaptability is key to survival. Mabel beamed at me. I knew you'd come around. It's just so much less stressful when we don't obsess over every little thing, right? Absolutely, I said, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. You've really opened my eyes, Mabel. Internally, I was screaming. Every day, I checked the shadow logs. The list of deferred maintenance was growing. Bird 305, cabin pressure sensor glitching. Action, ignored. Bird 550, flap asymmetry warning. Action, reset system, no inspection. I was terrified. I prayed every night that nothing would happen before the deadline. It was a moral gamble I struggled with every hour. If a plane went down, it would be my fault too. But if I acted too soon, Nicholas would survive to kill someone later. I checked in with Sam, the lead mechanic, quietly. Keep your head down, Sam, I told him in the parking lot. Do the best you can. Document everything you're forced to skip. Keep your own copies. Something's coming, isn't it? Sam asked, looking at me with hope. Just make sure your tool chest is locked and you're nowhere near the management offices on Wednesday, I said. Wednesday, Thanksgiving Eve. The days ticked down. Monday passed, Tuesday passed. On Tuesday afternoon, Nicholas called an all-hands meeting. He stood on a stage in the hangar, flanked by Mabel. Behind them was Bird 209, gleaming under the lights. This quarter, Nicholas announced into the microphone, we are projected to have the highest profit margin in the airline's history. We have cut waste by 20%. The applause was thin, mostly from the administrative staff. The mechanics stood with their arms crossed, silent. And, Mabel added, taking the mic, we're proving that you don't need to be an engineer to run a maintenance department. You just need common sense. She looked directly at me. I clapped. I clapped slowly and deliberately. Enjoy it, I thought. Enjoy your moment. Because tomorrow, the bill comes due. That night, I cleared out my desk. I put my personal photos, my certificates, and my favorite mug into a box. I deleted my personal files from the company laptop. I sent one text message to Mason. Green light. He replied instantly with a thumbs-up emoji. I went home, poured a glass of wine, and sat on my porch. The air was cold, smelling of approaching snow. I didn't sleep. I just watched the sky, waiting for the dawn of the day that would cost them everything. Wednesday morning dawned with a sky the color of bruised iron. It was Thanksgiving Eve, the holy grail of aviation revenue. The terminals were already packing out at 0500. Families dragging suitcases, college kids in hoodies, business travelers rushing home. The air smelled of jet fuel and anxiety. I arrived at the office at 0700. The mood in the C-suite was jubilant. Nicholas and Mabel were already there, watching the departures, bored on the big screen like it was a slot machine paying out. "Look at that board," Nicholas said, sipping an espresso. "All green, on time, perfect efficiency." "It's amazing," Mabel chirped. She was wearing a festive orange scarf. "And to think, people said we couldn't handle the volume." I sat at my empty desk, my box of belongings hidden under it, and opened my email. I wasn't checking for work. I was checking the news. At 08:30, the first snowflake fell. At 08:45, Mason Reed walked into the air traffic control tower. I knew this because he texted me, "In position." The plan was precise. The FAA doesn't just call the CEO. When a grounding order is issued for imminent safety violations, they go straight to the operational control. They shut down the sky first, then they explain why. I walked over to the window. Bird 209 was at gate B12, boarding for Paris. I could see the passengers walking down the jet bridge, a young couple holding hands, an elderly man with a cane. My stomach twisted. "Please, Mason, now." At 09:00, the phone on Nicholas's desk rang. It wasn't the internal line. It was the red phone, the direct line to the operations center. Nicholas picked it up, still smiling. "Peterson here, how are the numbers looking?" His smile froze, then it shattered. "What do you mean stop?" he barked. "Stop what? The boarding? Why?" He listened for another 10 seconds, his face turning a shade of gray I had never seen before. "Who issued the order? The FAA? On what grounds?" He slammed the phone down. He looked at Mabel, then at me. His eyes were wild. "They're holding departures," he said, his voice trembling. "ATC just denied clearance for Flight 402 and Flight 88, and all of them." "What?" Mabel laughed nervously. "Is it the weather?" "It's not the weather," I said softly from my desk. "They said it's a safety directive," Nicholas stammered. "Something about compromised structural integrity across the fleet." The intercom on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Peterson, we have agents from the FAA and the NTSB in the lobby. They have a warrant for the maintenance logs." Nicholas looked at me. For the first time, he really saw me. He saw the calmness, the lack of surprise. "Jane," he whispered, "what did you do?" The doors to the executive suite swung open. It wasn't just security. It was a team of 4 men in dark suits, led by Mason Reed. He wasn't wearing his diner disguise. He was wearing his federal badge on a lanyard, and he looked like the angel of death. He walked past the receptionist, past Mabel, and stopped in front of Nicholas's desk. He placed a thick, red envelope on the glass surface. "Nicholas Peterson," Mason said, his voice projecting across the silent office. "I am Mason Reed, Senior Auditor for the FAA. Effective immediately, the operating certificate for this airline is suspended." "Suspended?" Nicholas shrieked, standing up. "You can't do that. It's Thanksgiving Eve. We have 50,000 passengers." "We are aware of the calendar," Mason replied coolly. "We are also aware of the falsified maintenance logs for aircraft N209, N402, and 34 others. We are aware of the paint over the stress fracture. We are aware of the skipped C-checks." Mabel stood up, trembling. "But we fixed those in the system." Mason turned to her. "We have the original metadata, Ms. Blair. We have the shadow logs." He looked at me, just a quick glance, but it was enough. Nicholas caught it. He whipped his head around to face me. You gave them the data." "I did," I said, standing up. "I gave them everything." "You violated your NDA," Nicholas shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I'll sue you. I'll destroy you." "Whistleblower Protection Act," Mason interjected calmly. "Federal law, Mr. Peterson. She is immune from civil liability for reporting safety violations. You, however, are looking at multiple counts of fraud and reckless endangerment." Mason turned to his team. Seize the servers, seal the offices. Nobody leaves with any electronics. The agents moved. The office descended into chaos. Phones were ringing off the hook, the ops center, the press, the board of directors. Nicholas slumped into his chair, watching his empire crumble in real time. Mabel was crying, asking if she could call her dad. I picked up my box from under the desk. "I'm leaving now," I said to Nicholas. He looked up at me, his eyes wet with tears of rage. "You just cost us millions, Jane. You killed the company." "No, Nicholas," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I saved the passengers. You killed the company." I walked out past Mason. He gave me a subtle nod. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and didn't look back. The scene in the terminal was apocalyptic. As I walked through the concourse with my box, I saw the result of my handiwork. Every screen simply read "canceled" in bright red letters. Thousands of people were standing around, confused, angry, shouting at gate agents. "What do you mean, grounded?" A man in a suit was yelling at a terrified attendant. "I have to be in Chicago by 6. "I'm sorry, sir," the agent was saying, tears in her eyes. "The FAA has shut us down. No planes are moving." I felt a pang of guilt for the passengers. I knew their holidays were ruined. I knew grandmothers wouldn't see grandkids and students wouldn't get home for turkey. It was a heavy price. But then I looked out the massive windows at the tarmac. Hundreds of planes sat motionless at the gates. The engines were cold. The tugs were parked. It was a ghost town of aluminum. And among them was Bird 209, the plane with the crack. It sat there, heavy and silent. If that plane had taken off, if that gear had snapped on landing in Paris, the carnage would have been horrific. The image of a burning fuselage flashed in my mind. I looked at the angry crowd again. They were inconveniently stuck, yes, but they were alive. They would go home, maybe take a train or a bus or fly another airline tomorrow. They would be angry, but they would be breathing. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sam, the mechanic. "Sam, just got the order to lock down the tools. FAA agents are swarming the hangar. They found the painted strut. Rumor is they're talking about criminal charges for management. Thank you, Jane." I took a deep breath. The guilt evaporated. I walked out of the terminal and into the cold, gray afternoon. The snow was falling harder now, dusting the windshields of the taxis. I hailed a cab. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Home," I said. "And can we stop at a liquor store? I need a bottle of champagne." I didn't go straight home. I went to a quiet bistro downtown, ordered a steak, and turned my phone off. For 2 hours, I just existed in the silence, watching the snow fall outside. It was the first time in 10 years I hadn't spent Thanksgiving Eve stressing about de-icing schedules or crew rotations. When I finally turned my phone back on at 8:00 p.m., the device nearly vibrated off the table. 73 missed calls, 28 voicemails, 102 text messages. Most were from Nicholas, a few from Mabel, a handful from the board of directors. I listened to the voicemails in chronological order. It was a fascinating case study in the 5 stages of grief. Voicemail 1, 3:15 p.m. "Jane, pick up. We need to issue a joint statement. This is a misunderstanding. Call me immediately." Deny. Voicemail 5, 3:45 p.m. "You ungrateful. Do you know what you've done? You're legally liable for this. I'm going to bury you in lawsuits until your grandchildren are paying off your debt." Anger. Voicemail 12, 4:30 p.m. "Jane, look, let's talk. Maybe we were too hasty with the transition. We can bring you back. Director of maintenance? No, VP. You can be VP. Just call the FAA and tell them it was a clerical error. Please." Bargaining. Voicemail 26:00 p.m. "They're talking about criminal negligence, Jane. The news trucks are outside. My dad is calling from the Cayman Islands. I don't know what to tell them. Mabel is locking herself in the bathroom. Please, I need help." Depression. I didn't listen to the rest. I didn't need to. The damage was done. I scrolled through the text messages. One stood out from a number I didn't recognize, likely a member of the board. Ms. Reyes, this is Chairman Sterling. We are convening an emergency meeting at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. We would appreciate your presence. We believe Mr. Peterson may have misrepresented the situation. I typed a reply. I am no longer an employee of the airline. My testimony is with the FAA. Happy Thanksgiving. I put the phone down and finished my wine. I wasn't going to that meeting. I wasn't going to save them. They wanted to run the airline without me? Well, now they could face the consequences without me. Thanksgiving Day is usually a slow news day. Not this year. I woke up, made coffee, and turned on the TV. The headline on CNN was flashing in red. Holiday travel chaos. Airline fleet grounded over safety fears. The ticker tape at the bottom estimated the cost. It wasn't just the refunding of tickets. It was the gate fees, the crew costs, the penalties, and the catastrophic loss of brand value. Analysts were estimating a loss of $100 million per day that the fleet remained grounded. And the fleet was going nowhere. I watched the footage. There was Nicholas, looking disheveled and frantic, trying to push through a crowd of reporters outside the HQ. He wasn't the arrogant disruptor anymore. He looked like a child who had broken a very expensive vase. "We are cooperating fully," he shouted over the microphones. "This is a minor administrative discrepancy." The camera cut to a reporter. "Sources within the FAA tell us this is far from administrative. Allegations of systemic maintenance, fraud, and falsified safety logs have surfaced. The Department of Justice is reportedly opening a parallel investigation." By Friday morning, Black Friday, the stock market opened for a half day. It was a bloodbath. The airline stock plummeted 60% in the opening hour. It was a freefall. The efficiency that Nicholas had touted was revealed to be a house of cards. At noon, I got a text from Sam. "Sam, they just escorted Nicholas and Mabel out of the building. Security took their badges. The board appointed an interim CEO. He's asking for you." I smiled. The interim CEO was likely Sterling, a pragmatic man who knew the value of a good mechanic. But it was too late. I wasn't going back to fix their mess. Mason called me that evening. "It's over, Jane," he said, sounding exhausted but satisfied. "The grounding order stands until every single plane undergoes a Level 4 inspection. That's going to take weeks. Nicholas is facing charges for fraud. Mabel, well, she's claiming she was just following orders, but her signature is on everything." "Did they find the shadow server?" I asked. "Oh yeah, it matches your logs perfectly. It's an open and shut case. You did it, Jane. You actually took down a giant." "I didn't take them down, Mason," I said, watching the snow pile up on my driveway. "Gravity did. I just stopped them from fighting it." I sat on the deck of my new cabin, looking out over the lake. The air was fresh, smelling of pine and water. It was a Tuesday, a day I would usually spend shouting over the roar of jet engines. Instead, I was watching a hawk circle the tree line. The airline didn't survive. The fines and the stock crash bankrupted them. They were bought out by a competitor for pennies on the dollar. Nicholas was currently awaiting trial. His disruptive approach to safety was going to disrupt his freedom for the next 5 to 10 years. But here is the twist, the part Nicholas never saw coming. I knew the industry. I knew that if the FAA grounded a major fleet on Thanksgiving, the stock would crash. I wasn't allowed to trade while I was an employee, obviously. That's insider trading. But the moment I signed my termination papers, the moment Nicholas fired me and I walked out of that building, I was a private citizen. I was an unemployed woman with a hunch. I took my entire savings, my pension, my severance, everything, and I bought put options against the airline stock. I bet against them. When the stock crashed 60% that Black Friday, my portfolio went vertical. I didn't just walk away with my dignity. I walked away with enough money to never inspect a hydraulic line again if I didn't want to. but I couldn't stay away completely. My phone buzzed on the patio table. It was an email from the FAA. Subject, Regional Director Onboarding. Mason had pulled some strings. The FAA didn't just want my testimony, they wanted my eyes. I had accepted a role as the Regional Director of Flight Standards. My job was to audit the very airline. Ease that tried to cut corners. I took a sip of my iced tea and looked at the camera. Porch wisdom. You know, people often ask me why I didn't just quit earlier. Why I stayed and fought with a boss who clearly didn't respect me. The mistake I made, and it's a mistake a lot of us make, was confusing my loyalty to the work with loyalty to the company. I loved those planes. I loved the mechanics. I thought that if I worked hard enough and yelled loud enough, I could save the company from itself. I was wrong. You cannot save a system that is designed to exploit you. Nicholas didn't care about my expertise. He only cared about how much money he could squeeze out of it. Here is what I learned, and what I want you to take away from this. First, document everything. If you work in a safety-critical field or any field where ethics matter, keep a personal log. Not on the company's server, but on your own drive. The truth is your only shield when the finger-pointing starts. Second, know when to walk away. I spent months stressing myself into an early grave trying to fix broken leadership. You can fix a broken engine, but you cannot fix a broken moral compass. When your boss asks you to compromise your integrity, that is not a negotiation. That is your exit cue. And finally, never let them think you are powerless. Nicholas thought he could fire me and silence me because I was just staff. He forgot that the people who build the machine know exactly how to dismantle it. Trust your skills, protect your reputation, and if they try to push you off a cliff, make sure you're the one holding the parachute.